but biographies of individual players, the ones like I was the kid who would actually be in the school library, like where's John? Or I would have books late, not because I just got them once and put them in my locker and forgot, but because I just hadn't read them or was halfway through reading. And so I've always been a bit of a book dork. So that was some of the stuff I started reading for sure.
I believe it was Pete Croatto that I interviewed recently had talked about Matt Christopher, maybe in a tweet or something. And so I looked into Matt Christopher because, like you said, it brought back great memories. I, of course, read the same. Did you know there's like a Matt Christopher estate? Like there are books continuing, right?
Yeah, there's an author he works with. Somebody, I can't remember the name, and I think it's actually a name writer who has like taken on the mantle of the Matt Christopher book. So yeah, I did see that there's like 50 of them now.
Exactly. And was your house full of books? Were your parents sports readers, sports fans, readers in general?
My dad is a diehard, huge sports fan. We grew up, my whole family generationally is from Boston. So that's where I grew up. Well, we moved all around, but I did end up spending like 3rd grade to 8th grade in Massachusetts. So like my formative sports years, we had like a package to the Red Sox games, and we had a package to when the Patriots sucked. We had a package for them. And like I'd go to like 4 to 6 games a year of all the sports, probably more than that for the Red Sox. Just because back then you could get cheap tickets and just show up and do all that. And it was fun. Like I said, my dad is a diehard fan. But as far as the books, I mean, I remember he had, Larry Bird Drive, which is like a Bible in Boston households everywhere. A couple other books. He traveled a lot when I was growing up. So he had a lot of like the John Grisham, like the paperback novels, like those, trade paperbacks you'd have just lying around. And he had those. Wasn't like a big book house, a huge sports house. I mean, sports. Yeah. Me and my brother, one-on-one in every possible sport, wiffle ball, basketball, volleyball, pool basketball, whatever we had going on. So that was always it. Sports Illustrated, we had delivered as far as long as back I can remember. ESPN the magazine, when it came out, was like a first thing that we had to the house. So reading was always a big part of all of it, but it wasn't like, my parents were scholars and, we had a library at the house. It was just sort of the books that were around or what I would read. But I think it was available to me. And I think that the key was, I had my own little like library in my room of the books that I liked and that I kept and that I was into.
Nice. The power balance between you and your brother, you talked about you guys grew up and played one-on-one and everything. Was there a clear power balance or was it like back and forth?
Man, so he's about 3.5, little over 3.5 years younger than me.
Okay.
Up until my senior year and his freshman year in high school was 1 year we were in high school together where we were the same height. He scooted past me by about 1.5 inches, 2 inches over the ensuing years. But for that year, we were exactly the same height, and the battles were, they were just unbelievable. We played till one of us gave up, right? I mean, that's the best part about having a brother. And I think the way I always joke is like he was a far better team sport athlete than I was. He was the quarterback of the football team. Captain of the basketball team. He didn't play any sport in the spring. I've always been stronger than him. And probably, I think, like in a dead sprint faster, but his coordination's always been better. No doubt he's a better basketball player. If you were playing pickup, you would absolutely want him over me, probably since he was 14 years old. But I can still beat the crap out of him anytime I want to this day.
There you go. Make sure he hears this one. I love that. I know that very well. I have an older brother and a younger brother. And probably be the 3rd best of the 3 of the basketball players. That was our main sport. And like you said, I love how you say, well, there's coordination, this, and that's the way it is, right? You go in every single category.
Yeah, absolutely. Right? I'm not going to give anything that I don't have to give. I mean, I've always been able to like bench more or whatever that kind of stuff is. Right. Swimming of all things actually was my sport. I grew up a swimmer. That was my sport. That was what I was all state in high school. That was what I could, went to college to do. And then I ended up not doing it because swimming in college is just a brutal, miserable 4 a.m. slog every day.
I bet, right?
Once I hit that I wasn't going to Olympics, I gave like a week of it and I said, I'm not going to do this. But that was my sport growing up. I was a junior Olympic swimmer. That was if I was gifted at one sport and you had to pin me down, anybody who knew me was like, oh, he swims. So swimmers really, if you know, are not known for being excellent at other team sports.
That's one of those sports like a wrestling that, you give so much props to people like that because, it works so hard and it's not like you're getting Ohio State, university football fandom type of thing, right?
Yeah.
As far as the reading material goes, I don't want to play the whole like in my day, right? But our kids will never know how good Sports Illustrated was, right? How it was everything.
No, you know what's weird? So my son, who is going to turn 8 next month, so he's 7. He likes National Geographic for kids, and he
Mm-hmm.
likes Sports Illustrated for kids. Now
Mm-hmm.
the issue is National Geographic is still around, I guess, but nobody,
Sure.
what the adult version of that is not for kids. It's like truly like an adult geopolitical thing.
Mm-hmm. Right.
He's 13. I'm not going to be like, now here you go. The issue I've been thinking about, which is what you just said, is there's nowhere for my son to go
Hmm.
after sports. He loves the articles. He loves the cards that you get, like all the stuff that we loved,
Sure.
but there's nothing to graduate to. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Yes.
And so you're
Yes.
right. He won't
Yeah.
know. And I'm not going to be like, as much as I love and support the Athletic and every sports writer out there making a living writing for sports, I am a fan of and root for.
Right.
It's not the same as being like every Thursday Sports Illustrated comes. I'm not going to gift him like a login to the Athletic when he's 13. There's no cover story. There's none of the anticipation every day.
Yes.
And I was just
Yes.
talking to a friend of mine, Vic, this morning actually about this. It's like, a lot of us, and we maybe, let's say maybe 5 years younger than our age, just maybe somebody born 85, 86 will have a tail end of remembrances of how big it was, talking about going to school that Thursday or Friday and talking about the Sports Illustrated cover, wondering who made it over the weekend during a football season, or, Steve Rushin and Rick Riley and all these names. And it's, there's no equivalent now. I don't know. I don't know how you can lose something if they'll never have had it.
Right.
But there's some amount of dismay that I have of what is when he's too old for Sports Illustrated for kids. The next thing is just a website. It just seems lame, even though I'm rooting for all the sites.
You really bring it back. I mean, Thursdays, the Thursday Mail. Who's on the cover this week, right? Oh man,
who wrote the cover story? Did you get a Gary Smith like 8,000 word amazing story, or did Dick Riley do a story, or any of the people they had that were in there? Steve Rushin was always my personal favorite. I love the puns, plays on words, and all that kind of stuff. So I look forward to his Air and Space or Russian Lit, whatever. He had 2 different ones that he did.
Oh yeah.
And I knew all the writers and the faces in the crowd. Maybe you knew someone,
faces
you played
in the crowd,
against someone, or you heard about someone in your. There was just so much to it.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I get all the reasons why. We don't have to get into print and all that, but you just can't replace it. I don't think that feeling, that tactile feeling of, like you said, open the mailbox and it's like, oh, my guy, my team's on the cover, my college team that I follow or whatever. So when he's done with Sports Illustrated for kids, I don't know. Maybe it's just books, which will be fine with me, but I don't know.
I was going through my stuff in my old room at my parents' house where I would only stay as a guest. Even in my adult years, I would stay as a guest. And there's the wrinkled up, probably from 99, 2000, this article about this Serbian basketball player who came over to the States, and he was working with kind of a former star in New York City basketball. Like he said, 12 pages long, 10 pages long, and just an incredible read. The one that I've gone back to and read every 3 years, you know what I mean? And that's what Sports Illustrated was. Yeah. It
was like a place to show off, right? It was like, these are the best of the best. And, I grew up in Boston. So for me, I was lucky enough, Peter Gammons, Bob Ryan, Jackie Mack, like that was, I grew up with people who became national names from that paper, Lee Montville, all those guys. So it was like it's gone down in the sports journalist geek world of like the greatest maybe staff of all time. LA Times had a couple of writers, but that was my formative years. The years we lived there, the Boston Globe came, opened up the sports section, and those were my guys, right? I read cover to cover the whole thing. And so we're getting waxing old man nostalgic. The newspaper is like, you don't have that feeling of like, you sit at the table and your dad would read this and you talk about that article or whatever it was, and what did Bob Ryan do, or you look at the box scores, and it's, again, everything's moved on. You can't go back to that, but I don't know what replaces that exactly. And looking at the TikTok last night from some player, like maybe that.
Times change. We'll move on. One last thing about Sports Illustrated. Would your son recognize the name Buzz Beamer?
Maybe. So, that was like the cool cartoon. Yeah, maybe. He's more into the, he likes like the, any of the picture stuff. I mean, he's a little too young to like read through it.
Sure.
But the cards are cool. I'm getting him into, all the baseball and basketball cards. So the cards are good. And then the articles they do a lot of facts and figures stuff, a lot of infographic stuff now. If you haven't done it in a while.
Yeah.
Like the front half of the magazine is facts and figures and gifts and all kinds of cool stuff. So that's his favorite stuff.
Oh. So the name of the podcast is the Chills at Will podcast. It's about those lines, those excerpts, those pieces that gave you chills at will. Like, you're a rap fan, let's say, and it's that line that you keep repeating because it's so good, gives you chills, gives you thrills. Can you think of any writers who gave you those chills? Any particular texts where you got those chills, particularly as a younger person?
The first one I remember, it probably was, I don't know the specific one, but and everyone who's reading now, his reputation has changed over the years. But I think to change it now would be silly. But Rick Riley, the back page of Sports Illustrated, we were just talking about.
Oh yeah,
he was it. I mean, you can make fun of him now. I know he went to SI and he did, ESPN. All this stuff happened. But from like 89 to 98, 99, he was the king of the sports writing world. And I read, like you probably did, the Sports Illustrated backwards because of his one page, Life of Riley. And that was it. And that was one of those things where there was a level of kind of fame to it. It had his face on it. It was in everyone's mailbox. And it was like, if you want to do this, this is the king of the mountain. This is, the boardwalk and park place of sports writing. That's where you want to maybe get to. A level below that in terms of just exposure and stuff was like a Bob Ryan, that kind of guys, Jackie Mack, where you'd read their columns and follow their stuff on the Celtics or whoever it was, at least whatever your team was. As I got a little older, talking about the chills at will part, when you read someone who kind of just, you realize how good you could possibly be. So probably somewhere in high school, this is a little before you could really just Google and learn stuff. I came across Jim Murray, the famous writer from the LA Times. And he has a couple books. He has like collections of whatever, but he has one book called The Great Ones. And it's all of his columns from all the way back, just his columns on specific people, all the way back from like Don Drysdale to all the way to Tiger Woods and Junior Seau and some of the most recent guys. I mean, for those who are listening who may not know who he is, he passed away in the mid 2000s, I think, but he wrote the quintessential column in sports from probably like mid 50s to the 80s till some of the big national guys came. But if you're ever interested, I mean, you don't even need to go to like journalism school to become a sport. Just get The Great Ones and realize the man was a wizard. He could, the stuff he did in 650 words or 700 words, he was funny. He was relevant. His references matter to this day. His metaphors matter to this day. He captured these athletes in 700 words or 650 words, like to me, almost nobody since. And so when you bring that up, that's the first guy who, from the fame and the popularity side, Rick Riley just having that column, but Jim Murray, when you read him and you go, well, this is probably the best someone can do with this form. This may be his voice, the way he did it, the joy that he had in his writing. To me, when I think about that question you just asked, his name is the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah. I'm a high school English teacher, and a huge part of literature and making it relevant is those personal stories. We read something we study something as brutal as the Holocaust, and Anne Frank and Elie Wiesel with Night. How do you, the idea of getting to know an individual story, right? And I know Rick Riley did that very well. I remember in particular he did an article right after the Columbine tragedy, and it was where he dealt with like the football team and the athletes at Columbine, and he gave them a name and he gave them a face and he gave them characteristics. And I mean, literally 21 years later, I'll never forget that.
Yeah, definitely. He had a few like that were both timely and topical. And I found the ones that he would probably file as like his whimsical fill-in columns when he didn't have a big story or interview to be kind of the most charming sometimes.
That's true. So you talked a lot about Boston. You were very lucky to have such great writers with the Boston Globe. You were I guess that would be like the Tony Eason years, as far as the Patriots
we had. This is my because we've had such an embarrassment of awesomeness in Boston.
Right.
To earn the stripes of all the struggling fans out there. When I lived there, we had my dad through his work had like a 3-game or 4-game home package for the Patriots. And the year I went, it was Hugh Millen. They were 2-14. And the next year was a mix of a bunch of bums. They were 3-13. They were the laughing stock. And it was the old Foxborough, for people who don't remember or even care, was basically a giant high school stadium. It was just tin aluminum seats. There was no backs on the seats. There was no there was nothing. You would go and sit there and freeze. The parking was miserable. There was like an old Jumbotron that was like worse than even like a Tecmo Bowl thing. It was a dump. It was a beyond a dump. And you'd go and watch them lose 35-3 to the Jets or whoever it was. You'd long for like, I wish Ken O'Brien was my quarterback. Like that's how bad they were. So those were the years that I went. And so the subsequent, Super Bowl appearance in '96 out of nowhere with Bledsoe and all those guys.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
All the success with Brady was great. But for me, I'm old enough to have earned it at least. I have a cousin who's like 28 who literally was just born and fell into nothing but championships.
Yes. I won't take any offense there. Ken O'Brien went to my high school. His sister was my babysitter.
Oh, wow. Okay.
I won't take any offense there.
I think he made a couple Pro Bowls. It wasn't like a Hall of Fame or anything.
Right. I appreciate that, boss. Yeah, like you said, it's been an embarrassment of riches in recent years. Can you tell me a little bit about, obviously there's a big in between those Matt Christopher books, those sports biographies, and writing great books like Hoops Heist and A Life of Dad and about Mean Joe Greene, etc. What did you study in school? What were some of your first writing jobs, out of those days?
So school, I went to James Madison University in Virginia. I had what's called it's a media arts major, which is just nothing basically.
Okay.
It's one of my things. I've spoken at a ton of journalism schools, and since I a lot of bigger name journalism schools than I went to, and it's kind of like one of my pet peeves is just so many kids, and you teach English, graduate college with no idea how to write or get a job, and they just spent 4 years in college trying to learn how to write and get a job. And it always has it flummoxed me when I was there, when I would ask my teacher, so how do I write for Sports Illustrated, or if I want to write for Men's Health, what do I do? And it occurs to you that feeling when you get in college where your teachers have never done any of the things you're trying to do, but they're teaching you, right? And it's a very frustrating thing. If I could reform the education system in any way, it would be that they're allowed to hire people who don't, they always make you have an MFA or some ridiculous PhD, but just who actually worked in the field that people want to have a job in. Like it boggles my mind that that's a detriment somehow in the classroom. But anyway, so when I went out there, when I was in school, I really wanted to try to write, and there was just no answers. I mean, I didn't have a teacher there wasn't a person on campus who had a byline published in anything you or I would have ever heard of. So basically I graduated school, and my dad hates when I say this, but with like starting over, right?
Oh, wow.
So I had decided somewhere around my junior year that I was going to move to LA. I wanted to live in California. I wanted to get rent. I just had this thing in my head. I'm going to LA. I wanted to maybe write screenwriters. I wanted to write for movies or TV or magazines were out there. I just wanted to go and do something on my own, do something exciting. So I graduated, moved out to California, and I'd written for the paper at school, whatever, stupid stories on the local ski slope and our fraternity basketball team winning or something, but nothing of consequence. My last year summer, I did intern at they didn't even know, and I'm not knocking, I guess in some way I'm knocking specifically the school, but I think every kid has this kind of issue of like, well, how do I get an internship? And it's like, oh, I don't know. So I just went home with the Yellow Pages and called all the local papers and got myself an internship at it was called in New Jersey, like the Ridgewood News Conglomerate. It was basically like one company owned the rights to like 6 local papers, and then the middle 40 pages were all the same, and then the outside 3 or 4 were like localized, right? So I did.
So for when your kids listen to this in 10 or 15 years, when they're a little older, can you explain what the Yellow Pages are?
No, I know, right? Yeah. Right? So the Yellow Pages. No, you're right. You'd open up and I'd go through all the local papers and call them, not even text them or email them.
Right.
Hi, I'm John. Going to be a senior in high school, a senior in college. I'm going to be a writer. And somebody said yes, and they let me come in and write about the town council meeting and local softball games and all that stuff. So I moved to LA, which is what I wanted to do. I had a job. My first job, I had the friend I worked with was my friend of my dad's son lived out there. So I just lived on his couch like everybody does in LA, which is great in Santa Monica. I mean,
Oh, not bad.
No, not bad at all. And he knew someone who was on like this Hollywood Center Studios lot, which is where the Man Show and a bunch of Comedy Central shows were. So I got a job actually on the lot, just working for the lot, loading trucks, unloading the set. And I happened to be building the desks. I mean, literally just building the desks in an office for the Man Show. And Jimmy Kimmel and Corolla and this other producer they had were the first guys there because they were the producers of the show. I had a Red Sox hat on. And so one of the producers of the show, this guy, Daniel, was a big Red Sox fan and literally just talking sports every day. And when they were about to start production, I just said, I'd really like to just work on this show instead of just going to another building to build more desks for like the Andrew Dice Clay show, right? Or whatever it was going to be. Right. And they put in a word. It was Mad TV was the next show. Sorry, it wasn't that.
Oh, yeah.
And they put in a word and I did. So I was a production assistant there. And while I was there, I started submitting writing. I got a couple skits on or ideas of skits on, but I really wanted to write under my name. So I started submitting articles to a lot of the fitness magazines that I read, Muscle and Fitness, Men's Health, and Men's Fitness, which were all in Woodland Hills. And from the writing side, it's a crazy story, but I went to the library at Santa Monica. They didn't have a computer, and I didn't want to be caught like at Comedy Central, like submitting writing for other stuff. So I went to Santa Monica Public Library, like signed my name on a computer. If you know anything about that's a huge public library known for all the homeless people who go in all day to get out of the sun. So it's not the nicest place to be during the day or, after hours mostly. But I went in there because they would go use computers, basically arguing with people to get on the computer.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to apply. I didn't even know how to apply to write for anywhere, how to send a query letter or anything. So I learned through Writer's Digest how to do all this stuff.
Writer's Digest.
Writer's Digest. I found the masthead inside the old magazine, and I wrote to a guy named Jerry Candela, who was the editor-in-chief of Men's Fitness, this article and it started out, I'm white, I'm 5'11", I want to dunk. And I'm going to do everything I can on how to do it. And amazingly, he called me the very next day. So I went and interviewed like the strength coach at UCLA, at USC, a couple different athletes. And I got this ridiculous program with bricks in the water and cinder blocks and squat thrusts and all this stuff. And I dunked. It was awesome. I built myself up to do it, and I wrote the article. And that was the first like big break that I had. I got a story in Men's Fitness on how to dunk. And then while I was doing that, I got hired literally for a penny a word to write for the Santa Monica Sun and the Brentwood News.
Okay.
Literally, a penny. Like I'd write a whole article and get like $5 for a 500-word article. So I didn't quit my job at Comedy Central just yet. On my $90 a day there was way, I had to bump it up to 100 if I could write 1,000 words.
Let me ask you about the article if I can.
Yeah.
So 5'11", you couldn't dunk. You were pretty dang close, I assume, before.
I had always been able to grab the rim pretty good. I wasn't hopeless, right? Like I was probably what I would say, maybe 8. I had good enough hands to grip, palm the ball. I was probably like 8 to 10 inches short. When I was in high school and at my absolute best, I could probably like yoke a volleyball.
Okay.
But by the time I'd moved out to LA, I'd already been through college. I had, I was swimming and pick up hoops. I wasn't really lifting, or I couldn't afford to belong to a gym at that point. In fact, the article that I got, they let me. I told them what I was doing, and they gave me like a month at like some Bally's or something.
Okay.
Bally's in Hollywood.
Oh my gosh. Have you had any ideas that you feel like, this whole idea, like you could have an idea right now that maybe takes 10 years to come to fruition. That's great. Have you ever had any ideas that you felt like, dang it, like they're done? Like because of whatever reason, the time is up, the statute of limitations?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I had one. So I got to do a part of it. I always wanted to see what it would be like and I always kind of did a little George Plimpton-esque stuff. Like I liked when I was a little younger, and I think I'm in actually probably better overall shape now than I was, but that's different than being in like competing.
Yes. Oh yeah.
So I did training for the NFL Combine with a bunch of NFL running backs. So this was probably like, I was like 35. So it was the tail end of, Frank Gore level, right? Like I could still play, whatever. But I got to do that. I spent almost a week going through all the training. They're there for for 4 months or something like that. But I was basically training to run the 40, training to run the passing drills, the shuttle run, and all that stuff. And, the typical thing, like I did all the stuff that they did. And of course, after I ran the 40, the next drill, I like tweaked my back, trying to catch a ball off my cleats. And the plan was to do that and then ultimately go to the Indianapolis Combine. I didn't have to compete in front of everybody, but like experience it, the whole thing.
Okay.
And I never went back to that because you just can't do all that. I'm 42 now, but like that was one that I regret. I wish I had done that. I think if I had been at a place in my career, and I wasn't, we can't rush stuff, but if I had been in a place in my career even 3 years earlier, I would have been athletic enough still and young enough still to like pull that off and actually hang out with the guys and kind of just blend in. And I think I looked young enough. I got along with the guys great. They were all awesome. They made fun of me. I made fun of them. But yeah, it was just one of those things.
The one that got away.
Yeah, the time passed, man. I had one like that for beach volleyball too when I lived out in Minnesota, where I wanted, because you remember, like, and we talked for those listening that you lived out there for a while. Like you could see they play on the beach right there. Like it'd be, the guys, the big name players would be out there. And I'd go out and I wanted to do one like that where I would pretend, go into like a Hermosa Open as like an unseeded person with someone and do all that. But that was even harder because the sand is such an equalizer.
Yes.
If I was too slow for, like by the time I hit that age, like there was no way. Jumping off sand and being fast on sand makes someone who can't jump and isn't real fast like way, way worse.
I want to head out there one day and see. I think Richard Jefferson hangs out there and plays some volleyball.
Blake Griffin did too for a while.
Oh,
a lot of
wow.
those guys who played for the Clippers for a while. You used to see them all the time. Anyway, yeah, those guys.
Yeah.
This guy, Chase Budinger, remember?
Oh, okay, yes.
He played college ball. He's an unbelievable beach volleyball player.
Right.
Helps that he has like a 44-inch vertical off.
Yeah, no big deal. I used to see Luke Walton back in the day at Sharkies in Manhattan Beach, but we'll leave it for another day. But so you could have been like the second Vince, the Italian guy from the Eagles.
Yeah.
Right? Oh, man.
I think he was a much better athlete of all the sports I played, and I played 3 years of high school football. I was never good. I was like a special teams guy. I can admit my limitations. I was an average basketball player, and that was way better of a football player than I was.
So about the one that got away, I had I guess it's still probably up, called the older I get, the better I was. And it was about trying to dunk a basketball, like you talk about, right? And everything was in place. In high school, I was able to dunk like a tennis ball, right? So I could dunk, quote unquote, but not in the game for sure. So the idea was to train, was to blog it, was to log it. I even had the perfect conflict where I ruptured my Achilles. Actually playing hoops, right? So it's like, okay, cool. He comes back from it. He gets better. And I just kind of let it go. And that one's one that just got away. So
it's frustrating. So I dunked it. And the two things, and then we can move on from the dunking thing. But if you are under 6 feet or whatever if you're height you are, if you've never dunked, one thing that you don't realize is when you do, in the way that the program worked, it was 3 weeks on really heavy and then 1 week off where you wouldn't do anything to let everything recover. And then the day before you start the next program, you did like a vertical test.
Okay, right.
And that's when the day I would play pickup. Like the guy advised me, like, don't play during this because you don't want your lateral movement. Like play on the rest weeks. And I would be swatting guys. Like you don't realize it's like a superpower when it comes to time. And when you do, and again, I didn't dunk in a game. I'm not making it like some kind of crazy TV show where all of a sudden I'm doing alley-oops. So when you finally do it, you've never landed. I've never been that high. And it hurt. Like you don't know how to do it. You hang on the rim a little longer. You fall backward and stuff like that. So I only probably actually went to basketball like 3 times. And then, of course, the very next week when I was playing, I tried to be amazing and pulled my quad. Once I took a month or so off of the program I was on, I mean, I wasn't going back to it. It was so much work. It was like an hour and a half of legs a day.
Oh, man.
I kind of let it lapse. But my friend for like 3 weeks, I was like a leaper. He was like, who is this guy just leaping all over the place, jumping around? And it never came back.
But it felt great though, right?
It did. I think
it felt weird.
I needed another 2 inches to really feel like I was dunking. Yeah. I mean, this was very much like the rim's here and I got it over. And if you saw it, you'd be like, that guy can dunk. But at no point you'd be like, wow, he threw down. It was just enough to qualify.
So Men's Health, what kind of articles did you write? Who was your audience? I mean, that's kind of an obvious duh. But who were you thinking about writing for when you were putting those pieces down?
I started writing actually first for Men's Fitness, and we did the same thing at McDonald's and Burger King. And back then, they both had over 2 million subs. Like it was a big deal, for the magazine. So I started writing like these little profiles on athletes. I had my best friend from growing up, who still is, my friend Eddie Koblenz, worked for the NFL Players Association at the time. We were both young. He was just there trying to get the players some visibility. I was like, hey, I'm working at Men's Fitness. Any of these guys want to talk about fitness or exercise or whatever.
Right. So
he hooked me up with a couple. Torrey Holt, I remember, did a nice piece.
Oh, wow.
Antoine Randall, when he was drafted, he got me a nice piece for. And then I was like, at the time, anyone who cares, back then, fitness magazines had big faceless models on the cover. It was just dudes who looked shredded. And there was this push within the fitness industry to realize that like you'll be much better off having, an NFL wide receiver on your cover, or, whoever, than anybody else. So
Mm-hmm.
I was in the right place where I was pitching, like, let me do an NFL guy on the cover. And
Mm-hmm.
so through my friend Eddie, I got Tiki Barber, who was a big deal back, when he was a New York Giants star, running back. So I got him for a cover for Men's Fitness. That was like my big get. And that was how I started. So I did this is probably 2002, 2001 or two, about a year's covers of Men's Fitness. So I did Tiki Barber, Karl Malone, Mike Modano, a bunch that didn't even run because there was an editorial switch halfway through. I did Roy Jones Jr. and some other guys. And so that was what I wrote for them. And I was like, all of a sudden I went from having never written to being like 24 or 25 and writing cover stories for this big national magazine.
Wow.
And like, everything you learn in publishing, all it took was the editor-in-chief to get fired, or a new editor-in-chief to come in and say, we're not doing athletes anymore. And it went away. It was like 8 amazing months and then it was gone.
Yeah. Is it safe to say that most of the articles were about like their regimen, their fitness regimen?
I did, because I had such a strong like readership growing up of the magazines we talked about, I really shifted it to like every article. What my pitch was, like, every article will have like a workout in the end and a box of like what they did for speed or quickness or power, whatever the athlete's thing was. But I really made it like 70-30, a short bio in my brain, homage to like a Jim Murray piece, or like spending 3 days with this person, including their workouts. And obviously because of the fitness side, you had to talk about their healthy nutrition and eating, and maybe there was a supplement company that needed mentioning. But to my brain, my lofty goal was to like pull fitness writing into like legitimate sports writing. I didn't do, of course.
No. You talk about the like the supplements and that kind of thing. Was there this idea between like art and commerce? You're trying to write these Jim Murray stories, you're writing these, personal interest stories. Did you have a push or a pressure to like, you know what I mean, to sell a certain brand of what was big back then, creatine? And
always, it was, man, fitness magazines were probably the earliest magazines to realize just how how much they relied on the advertisers and Gillette and all those kind of places. So I would, we'd want an athlete for a cover, and I would just pick some, let's get Jeremy Shockey or who, picking people who were popular back then, football players, or, they didn't really go for basketball players too much. Malone is a physical specimen, so he worked. But the idea was like, some of these athletes were so far removed from what the average reader of Men's Fitness could ever achieve. You're not going to be 6'9", 3% body fat like Karl Malone. There's no reason, but they got him on the cover. But yeah, there was a lot of that. The issue was always, okay, so we want to make EAS or Muscle Milk happy. So instead of your football player, we're going to put on their football player. And we're going to talk about how when they do their quotes, and they would talk about this stuff anyway, so that I didn't mind some of the blurring. It wasn't like an advertorial, but somewhere in the middle of what I would think would be really brilliant prose would be, and I never forget after I work out to have my post-glycemic EAS bar, right? And I'd be like, I used to make my blood boil as a writer, because it would immediately cheapen and dampen everything in my mind. It was like, oh, so he's just, and I know some readers, probably 95% of the readers probably didn't care, but I knew. And I knew when I was sending the articles to maybe bigger places to write, like the GQs of the world or whoever, they would see right through it. And it didn't end up hurting me. Everyone who writes has such a lofty thing in there. I've gotten over that as I've gotten older. But when I was younger, that would be the kind of thing that a little, writer nerdy would be like, it looks so much like we're selling out. And it's like, we're paying you to write about an athlete. Like, shut up.
So you get some great epiphany from the person, then all of a sudden you're talking about EAS and muscle milk.
Yeah, I'd write, I remember interviewing Frank Mir he was about to fight Brock Lesnar in the MMA. I went to Vegas for 2 days. I did this amazing story in my mind. I did in 1 weekend. I interviewed. So when Randy Couture and Brock Lesnar were going to fight for like the very first big MMA like crossover with the WWE guy. And then Frank Mir fought him first. So I did both of those stories for Muscle and Fitness and Flex. And I wrote this, what I thought was like a brilliant open for the Frank Mir piece. It's 5 a.m. He and I are sitting at the gym. Somebody didn't show up at the key, what you want to dream about, right? As a writer. And there was a quote in there, and then my editor was like, "What were the pads?" Like, the company that's in there, like, we have to make sure. And I was like, "Come on, man." And I think I might have won that one. I have to look at the piece, but I
Okay.
remember a prolonged email exchange of like, it doesn't make any sense right here to say that these were the Fight 92 pads. Because his plan was, we'll put them in, then I'll have advertising go tell them they're in the open. Let's do, give us $2,000 to run an ad at the back. And I get all
Okay.
of that. Once I moved up the masthead as a writer and publisher and hired people, I 100% understand that every month it's like, this is money in, this is money out. If we don't have the ad money, we need to find ways to make a reason to call somebody. So now I understand all of it. I don't, nobody likes it. I don't think anyone likes being kind of told what they have to write. But I remember in the artsy fartsy brain that I had, I was like, that doesn't even sound like, who would even mention the brand there? Like you just have these things. So, insufferable is how I think I myself a lot of times when I was having these arguments as a younger writer.
So you write this Hemingway-esque open, and then it's like TM, and like trademark, copyright. Oh man.
Yeah. And as he sucked on his, tropical orange red lime energy drink available now, you know what I mean? I'd be like, oh no, you can't do that to me.
Am I correct with pardon me, real quick, before we move on to the books, would you be able to tell those two Karl Malone little anecdotes? One is about how you ended up taking a picture in the shower with him. Am I getting that correct?
Yeah. Karl Malone, man. So I had always wanted to do a piece on Karl Malone. I read an article about him in sport. It might have been Sports Illustrated, but it was about his like just voracious lifting sessions and workouts. So when I was at Men's Fitness, I pitched like he had just. I lived in LA. It was the year he signed with the Lakers, that super team. If you guys remember, for any of the young readers, it was like Kobe, Shaq, Gary Payton, Karl Malone, and then I think Devon George was maybe the fifth starter on the team. But it was like a dream team. Malone was very towards the end of his career, but was still very capable of 20 and 10 a night easily. Gary Payton was still pretty good. And so I got to do a story, and I was like, the Lakers press guy, John Black, who anyone who's in basketball, like just extraordinary guy, like went bent over backwards to make it easy on you to do it. And he got Karl Malone to say yes. And I got like passes to like 3 or 4 home games and one shoot around, and it was amazing. Right. And then everything went great. And then we had this idea for the photo shoot. It was at a hotel in Manhattan Beach, actually. So I'm meeting everybody there. I'd had most of the story done, maybe 3/4 of it done. And Karl Malone gets there, and they had this whole like Lakers, but like gold, like a Lakers yellow, but like in a tin, like a gold kind of background for him. He was going to do like these bodybuilding poses, and he had already talked in the interview about being an action hero. So he was going to do like, they brought all these props like Rambo stuff and whatever. And he kind of just was like changing and is like, what I've never done is an interview in the shower. We should get some shots of this. Trust me. Our photographer and everybody's like, well, we've spent the whole morning, setting this stuff up. And I was only there to observe. I wasn't really supposed to be involved. And he was like, well, let's why don't you get in here and let's just do it. Trust me, we'll get some water going. It was all even the more odd because he had a daughter who had just painted his fingernails and toenails, which I have a daughter, mine have done all the time too, but just on a 6'10" dude, who was in the shower. The whole thing's added up. But so I ended up, they didn't use that shot, but just kind of placate him. I was in a hotel room shower. He had on basketball shorts. That's it. And he was in the shower. I don't even remember where the shots were. There's somewhere, some photographer somewhere has the other end of this story. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. It was a big crew because with the Lakers, we wanted to do a good job with it.
Yeah.
But, that's how I ended up in the shower.
Life's all about stories, right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, what a great story to tell. And then I paraphrased this before. I don't think I said it correctly. It's from Jeff Pearlman's book, his recent book. Yeah. So Karl was kind of given like etiquette lessons to Kobe.
So during this week, this was the week of Thanksgiving, basically, that my article was happening. And the last pass that I had was to the game before Thanksgiving at Staples Center. I don't remember who they were playing, but I for most of the ride was like an hour 15. It was miserable just to get 30 miles to Staples Center. So I used to leave as early as humanly possible to get there, to have time and whatever. And I would stay as late as possible to miss traffic, basically. I mean, the press room was open till 2-3 hours after the game because guys were filing stories. Sure. So I was just hanging out. I had most of my story done after the shoot around before the game. And so what I had planned on doing was just going to thank Karl for his time because he'd given me a lot of it. probably more than I needed, but I was young and I was like, whatever, man, I'm just going to hang out at the Lakers practice facility and hang out at the Staples Center.
Yeah.
So I went in after the game, and I was waiting to talk to him and he was in there with both his ankles in ice. You know, if you've been in a locker room or you can picture a locker room, it's just a bunch of guys changing and icing and doing all their stuff.
Sure.
And as I was about to walk up to thank him, we had just started a conversation. He says, he's like, hey, hold on a second, man. And I'm like, all right, okay. You know, and he stands up and I see him like eye up Kobe, who's very young at the time, as Jeff Pearlman kind of goes to great length because there's just almost two Kobes at this point. Kobe's like basically slinking out the door and I could see it. And he calls him like young buck or young fella or something like that. And he goes and taps him on the shoulder and he whispered. I honestly, I told Jeff when I talked to him, like it felt, I could see from 40 feet away, it was like a dad reprimanding his kid. Like I didn't know what he said. And then all of a sudden Kobe went back around the room and I saw, cause he came close to like Derek Fisher and some of the other guys and Shaq and wished everybody have a good Thanksgiving, have a good, like, it was like a kid after a baseball game when they're like, good game, good game, good game, you know? He was like, have a good Thanksgiving, have a good Thanksgiving. How do your family? Have a good Thanksgiving.
Wow.
Around the room and then just did a loop and went out. And he was like, that doesn't go in the article. And I was like, of course not. That has no place in the article. And so cut to 15 years later or whatever it was, Jeff was announcing his book and talking about anyone who'd had any interviews or something on Twitter. And I completely forgot. And maybe a month later, he was talking about something. He mentioned something about Malone in a tweet about when he was researching the book. And I went, holy shit. So I texted him and I was like, or DM'd him and I was like, I have a really interesting story. And I was like, let me just check to make sure my dates and times are right. And I went, I had my press pass, I had my notes and it was all there. And I was like, let me tell you the story. So that story ended up in his book, an amazing book reading circus, kind of sharing what that locker room was like at that time. And that is actually a pretty good microcosm for what it was like.
It really is. It really is. Did you get a lot of instant credibility because you were younger in the locker room?
No, I didn't. From that team it was what it was. Like I had covered so I worked for Hoops Heist when they launched and I moved back to New Jersey to cover the Nets for a year. And that was very different. Richard Jefferson had just been drafted. Kenyon Martin was young. Like talking to those guys, they don't remember obviously, but like it was easy. We were same age, same shows, same movies. Like it was very easy to break the ice. They got used to seeing me. I wasn't a beat writer. I was doing a lot of just interviews and stuff for them. So that was far easier. They had never won anything. Jason Kidd was the biggest star on the team, but he was kind of weird. But like Kerry Kittles was nice. Like it was easy. Locker room in the Lakers. No, I mean I don't even know. Like it was just such a fractured. Like you just wanted to get out of there. Like it was just a weird place. They weren't friendly. I mean, Shaq was always funny to listen, but I wasn't friendly with him at all. And for the 3 days or 3 games, and I covered a bunch. I covered the Western Conference Finals and a few other things there. But I always went to the visiting team because that locker room was not a fun place to be.
So obviously it was of great value to you to have a relationship with Nate Robinson for this most recent book.
Yeah.
You did an article with him about him, maybe 2009. Am I getting the time right?
Probably, yeah.
Did that lead to that led to one of your first books or your first book?
Yeah. So I was writing for the Post Game, which was kind of Yahoo's answer to Grantland. And I still had, as you mentioned a little earlier, this idea of kind of a George Plimpton-esque thing. And Nate had just won, I think, his 3rd dunk contest. So I wanted to, even though I'd already written the men's fitness piece about dunking, I wanted to do one like where I would train with an NBA guy for whatever. I would do their workout that they offered. And we were into, when you look back on some of these publishing decisions, it was like for a little while, it was like, there has to be utility. We're going to do articles, but also takeaways. And then that changes the next year to we're going to do articles, but just interviews. Right. So it moves around. So at the time, there was a lot of stickiness to engagement. And if we can do an article with someone, I did one with him. I did one with Ray Allen about how to shoot a 3. There was like, let's do an article, but also show our readers how to do something or pick up. So obviously Nate made sense for the dunking part. I did a full feature on him, like a profile. And then the way I did it to make it palatable, so it wasn't like this mishmash of stuff, was I did 2 articles. One was on Nate. And then part 2 was on the secret to his, whatever the title was.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Nate the Great's leaping ability or something.
Awesome.
We ended up talking a lot. We got along. I mean, this happens sometimes with any job. You just randomly meet someone. It just happened to be, for me, it was Nate. We got along really well. And the article came out and it was cool. He thought it was awesome and he was excited, and he was getting a lot of like New York publicity because he was with the Knicks at the time, but not a lot of national. Probably not what he should have gotten for being 5'9" and winning dunk contests and all that.
Yeah.
And then, time passes. And I think it was the following spring is when he had that insane run with the Bulls after he'd been traded, where he basically for about 4 games outplayed LeBron on the Cleveland. Like he had an incredible run in the playoffs when it was the year like Derrick Rose got hurt, Joakim Noah got hurt, like everybody got hurt. And it was him and like a rookie or second year Jimmy Butler and a bunch of nobodies went past Brooklyn. They beat Brooklyn in the first round out of nowhere. He had a couple 30, 40-point games in overtime. Like it was Nate's world for like 2 weeks.
Right.
So I called him after that, congratulated him. And I was like, this is the end of the book. Like we need to write a book. What do you think? And instantly he was like, yeah, let's get my management on the phone. Let's figure it out.
Nice.
And so we got it together. And I think within a month I was in Seattle for like a week talking to him about doing his book.
That's so cool. That's so cool. You've written a lot about being a dad and also staying active. What's the Life of Dad all about?
Yeah, the Life of Dad was an organization founded, I think, in like 2012 or 13 by this guy, Tommy Riles and Art Eddy. And there's 3 or 4 more co-founder guys. And it was basically just started for a dad like help group, just, early social media. There was everything was seemed to be moms. Here's just a Life of Dad thing. And it started out for them as just a blog of like daily life. And remember, like everything sounds silly now, but back then it was new and different and like,
Sure.
oh, okay, yeah, no one's talking about dads. Now there's tons of dad focused stuff, right? But there wasn't at the time. They started a podcast called Life of Dad. And I laugh at it looking back now, but I had just put out this book called The Dadvantage after my daughter was born about how to stay in shape. It was just an ebook. It was like early Kindle. I was kind of experimenting with what it could be like. Muscle fitness and men's fitness, and everywhere I'd written for wasn't really yet publishing things on there. So I've always tried to be on the cutting edge of stuff if I can be. And so I wrote this book called The Dadvantage. And it was just basically about how to stay in shape around a kid without having a gym and without having time, like workouts with your baby and all these. I mean, it's still very useful. And I managed to be through just old-fashioned emailing, Googling any dad website and blog I could find. They had me on their podcast, and we really had a lot of fun. And a couple of weeks later, they got a big breakthrough, some advertiser, and had like Shaq on, and then it really took off.
Man. Okay.
And then about a year after that, one of the guys was stepping down from doing the podcast to do other things, and then Art and I took over to do the podcast. And what we did was we took like our 150 greatest episodes, and I wrote them into like an advice book. So it's everyone, from
cool.
Mark Cuban, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Tim Allen, Mike Golick, and Greenberg, and like all the Dale Earnhardt Jr., like all these big name actors, all these WWE guys, and put them in the book. And we did the book.
Very cool.
Chef Irvine, a lot of these guys that I became friendly with in the dad world. In fact, Perlman is in it, and I think Steve Rushin's in it too.
Okay.
So I got some of my writerly friends / guys I looked up to who are a little older in there. So that's
cool. So it seems that one of the keys to your writing is to get that workout in the morning first, get that done, huh?
Man, anyone who has kids, they're everything. They take up all your time. And what I learned very early was if I don't protect my time to work out, it's not going to happen. You can't put it at the end of the day, especially as your kids start having school and homework and games and coaching. If you put it at 8 or 9 o'clock at night, you're just going to be too tired. The stuff's going to come up. Someone's going to need help, especially when your kids are really little. There's nightmares, and it takes maybe 45 minutes to put them to bed instead of 10 minutes to put them to bed. And you're like, it's a source of anxiety. It's like, I was going to play pickup hoops today, or I was going to go lift at 10 o'clock, or I can't get out of the house. And it just, so I just decided to what my brother calls steal time, basically. I just decided to get up at 5 a.m. No one is awake. And I have no one bothering me, no one emailing me, no one calling me. 99% of the time, the kids are asleep. Occasionally, now they're older, but earlier they somehow randomly find their way to the garage. Yeah. And I bought a squat rack and some kettlebells and some slam balls. Nice. And from 5 to 6:30, I feel like I'm going to be sitting writing all day or doing cool stuff like this, talking to you or whatever I'm doing. When I'm not doing that, I want to be active and doing exercise and stuff. So my secret is I start my day with an hour to myself, blast. As you mentioned, it's Jay-Z, some DMX, and my bust around some of my guys. and just get it all out, lift heavy, grunt, sweat. And then by I go wake the kids up for school, have my smoothie, and it's like, that's done. And whatever happens the rest of the day is cream cheese.
Nice. So you're in there pushing weight while DMX is yelling, "Where my dog's at," or something
Where
like
my
that.
dog's at, yeah,
Nice,
X gonna give
nice,
it to you,
nice.
all that stuff.
He had people forget he had 2 albums that were huge at that time. But anyway, well, that's for a music podcast, right?
Yeah.
There's nothing like that workout in the morning. Totally. You said today, I think it was on Twitter, great tip. You said you do legs and then you get to reward yourself by sitting down and writing.
Earn the sit. Yeah, man. Listen,
earn the sit. I like that. Copyright that.
Yeah, I should, right? I mean, I do a lot of standing up. I have a couple standing areas that I work on. I don't have an official standing desk, but I stand up a lot. But if you're going to end up, I knew I had like a 3 or 4 hour somewhere close to that writing session coming up. Like, so I'll do a heavy deadlift squat, or it could just be a run, to the endurance type thing where you're not just sitting because you got up to sit. You're like, it's worth it, right? Yeah.
Let's talk Hoops Heist. You have that in the background. Just finished it.
Somewhere.
Just finished. It was published in a pandemic year.
Yes.
Right.
Written in a pandemic year. And
right.
Published in a pandemic year.
Yeah. So you wrote about that in the acknowledgement. So you pretty much wrote the whole thing this year last year, 2020.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah. The plan, books take so long to finally coalesce. And the plan was always to have it come out this Christmas. And, to push it back for the summer. And I was, we were, since Isaiah was starting his own publishing imprint, he didn't have to worry about buying printing press time and some of the things that like a traditional publisher has to worry about. So we had that flexibility as long as I was able to do the book. And of course, early talks were, several trips planned to Seattle, all these things that just got shut down. And so the question was, do we do it or not? And I was like, you know what? The way we've talked about structuring this book, we can do this. And there's I've been there before with Nate. That the reason I said we could do it is because I'd spent extensive time there when I went to interview Nate, and I had all my notes, all my photos, and luckily it was all the same place. Half these guys went to Rainier Beach or close to it.
Right.
Showed me around everywhere. I'd seen Washington, UW. Like I had a really good frame of reference for it.
Yeah.
So for me, I was like, this is why I think we can do it.
Wow. The book is great. The book is so interesting. You talk about the structure. The structure makes the book in that you have the 2 parts. One's mainly about what the history of Seattle and more so the Supersonics.
Yeah.
Right. And the second part is more individual stories about Isaiah Thomas, Nate Robinson, the coach Bethea, I want to say is his last name.
Yeah, Mike Bethea. Yeah.
And it's so good because it's like, all right, I want to know about how the Sonics rose and unfortunately fell.
Yeah.
And then I want to know about this incredible fraternity. It reminds me a lot of Sacramento as far as being such a big basketball town. I'm from Sacramento. I grew up in those years. And so it brought back a lot of that. You talk about Doug Christie.
Yeah.
And the different generations of Seattle players. Who was Nate Robinson was the first you talked to. Where did it kind of spiral out from there? What did it kind of branch out?
Yeah, so Isaiah, because it was with Slow Grind, Isaiah and this guy TJ Regan, who's his business partner with Slow Grind. We were the guys talking about the book and what we wanted to do with it. And I'd met TJ actually did it wasn't a documentary, it was like a short video series, State of Nate for Nate Robinson. So he was our bridge between the two. So when Isaiah and myself and TJ were talking about how to structure this book, that was really when I thought about the idea of how to tell the story where we weren't bouncing constantly from, 1979 winning the championship to somebody's opinion on that now. Like, when you write these kind of books, there's a way to tell a story. And if you just did it where I'm interviewing Ray Allen about what it was like and how he met these people, I thought it would be distracting.
Okay.
So I thought what I want to do is instead of going to present time and getting people's opinions on it back then, I wanted to take through the city of Seattle's basically life in their quest for a sports team, originally just one, all the way to the Sonics leaving, and tell it in the present time of the story when it's happening. So use all the quotes, use all the footage, all the interviews, all the radio stuff, all the newspaper things, everything from that time, and then structure part 2 as the legacy, using all of those guys who grew up watching those teams, like you mentioned, Doug Christie and Isaiah Thomas and Jamal Crawford and Brandon Roy and all them, as the kind of reaction to what happened. And that's why, so the
Mm-hmm.
book is the franchise and then the legacy. So in terms of who I wanted to talk to, it was originally the first set of people were the people who were on those actual teams, right? So George Karl and Gary Payton and all those guys and Detlef
Mm-hmm.
Schrempf. And then the legacy part, it was all the guys that I mentioned in the back end.
Yeah, legacy is the perfect word. I've heard the great writers talk about how writing is a science and an art. And you have the art for sure with the phrasing, the diction and such, and the science of it. That's really cool. It was so intangible to me as I read it about what made it a great book. I mean, I had many reasons why, but the way you explain it about the present tense, that really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I just felt like the two things you run into when you're doing these biographies, and it happened to me when I did a biography on Charlie Ward, who won the Heisman
Mm-hmm.
Trophy, played for the Knicks, won the national championship at Florida State. That was the first book that I'd really done where I was relying on a ton of interviews from a long time ago, in addition to all the newspapers and stuff. And there's
Mm-hmm.
such, I'm sure Jeff or whoever else you've interviewed with, there's such a discrepancy sometimes between what someone actually said after the actual game 30 years ago and
Okay.
what they say now about that game. It's usually, and it's all of us, right? You've
Mm-hmm.
rearranged it in your head, you've changed what the thoughts were, and you never want to get into a spot where someone's own quotes are contradicting them about something, or they've changed their mind, or they since reconciled with someone and they've never said that, right? So I
Mm-hmm.
really wanted to keep those two things apart. And so as I was going through the 70s, 80s, and 90s, I had interviewed, Gary Payton, I'd interviewed Detlef, and spent a lot of time talking to George Karl, and I interviewed Doug Christie and all these guys about, what those teams were like. And so the only time I used the quotes of the legacy guys were about those times in the 90s. I didn't talk about how they felt since until their kind of chapter came about. Even with George
Right.
Karl, I
Mm-hmm.
used the stuff from his book, the stuff from the post-game interviews, the stuff
Mm-hmm.
from the on-court interviews, from the actual game footage,
Mm-hmm.
all of that in the moment in the book, rather than, oh, that's right, 30 years ago when that happened, I thought we should have done this or that,
Yes.
or,
Yes.
actually here's what really happened. So
Yes.
my goal was to keep the readers in the present, really, so that when the Sonics lost the team and you actually read what happened, you were so invested because you'd gone along that journey.
Yep.
The idea was that if you didn't care about the Sonics at all, you were still pissed.
Yes.
And luckily, I think I've accomplished that from what I've heard.
No doubt about it. You definitely pulled it off. Yeah, it was like, all of a sudden I'm like, Howard Schultz,
Yeah,
like
yeah.
Starbucks. I'll never drink Starbucks. I don't really drink it anyway, but I'll never drink it again.
Yeah,
Oh,
exactly.
man. I don't know if you would mind reading a little bit from the foreword.
Oh, yeah. Let me, I got the book here because you had asked to have it.
Hey, just about basketball in Washington and about how much of a hoops haven it is.
The forward.
I'm looking at the second paragraph, but it could be any part of the foreword that you would like.
Yeah, this is, this came from a lot of the conversations Isaiah and I had when we were talking about why to do this book first. And he says, we say basketball in Seattle is more than a sport. It's a brotherhood and sisterhood. It's family. It's everything. We don't think of it as a game. We think of it as a culture. It's a culture that, by way of the sheer amount of talent in our region, fills up the rosters of the best colleges in the country and puts dozens of players in the NBA. It's a culture that is based on giving back to our community. As we read in this book, every single one of us who has been lucky enough to make a career out of the game we love makes it a priority to pass our knowledge on to the next generation. It's just what we do.
Yeah. And it just continues. And yes, for 40 years, it was a culture for which the centerpiece was the Seattle Supersonics, and now they're gone, right? And just this idea that even though the Sonics aren't there, and we talked earlier, hope maybe they're coming back.
Yeah.
But the legacy is just incredible. Jason Terry, Doug Christie, going back to the older Sonics from the 70s and stuff, I thought the Bill Russell part was very interesting, the way you describe it. He came from Boston. He won, 11 titles?
Yeah, 11 and 13 years.
And he just left kind of like, I'm out. And you look back and, from what I've read and heard and in your book and stuff about the way that he was treated very poorly by the white media, et cetera, you don't blame him. Did you find in Seattle a different racial environment?
Well, originally he moved there because he felt that it was a progressive city and it was more tolerant of, the African American experience and, success and, African Americans in the community and all that kind of thing. But as it turned out, like when he reconciled with Boston later, because he always said, it was the media that he loathed and it wasn't the people, but he couldn't separate the two. And for me,
I see.
it kind of had like a double thing, because I having grown up in Boston,
Sure.
Bill Russell is, the pedestal, right? Like I grew up hearing my grandfather was a diehard fan, used to actually work out at like one of the same old school gyms as Red Auerbach. Like he was, back before basketball was nearly as big as it was, he was a diehard fan, and stories of Russell and how great he was and what a great teammate he was. I had no idea until, obviously I got older, but I had no idea how deep his resentment for the Boston organization was, for the media was, how he swore he would never go back. And he tolerated some horrendous and horrific stuff. So once he reconciled and realized he'd been actually probably missed out on 20 years of being beloved in a city, he probably had a little bit of that. He went back, and ever since he went back, it had been great and nothing but a love fest. But what I didn't realize was just how much of a prick he was as a coach. It was just, it was eye-opening.
Yeah.
It was eye-opening how bad he was. And every player that you hear about, again, I really tried not to interview now because he's such a beloved figure.
Sure.
People are going to be very reluctant to say anything negative about him. But anything in the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, the Seattle papers, his books, other people's books, openly are like, this guy is awful to play for.
Now, remind me, was there an in-between, or was it straight to Lenny Wilkens after him?
No, it was actually Bill Russell's cousin got the job. I'm blanking on his name, of course, because there's so many names in the book. But Bill Russell's cousin got the job, and they were terrible.
Yeah.
And then that began the Lenny Wilkens turnaround. They won like 20-something straight games, and all the way to the finals against Washington.
Who's just the most impassive, right? Calm.
Yeah, he was great. I mean, people don't. Yeah. Nobody would, but he was an excellent player, excellent, point guard, and then just had that pulse of the players, turned the game around, made it fun for them, and they, they went from super taskmaster kind of jerk from Bill Russell to extremely laid back, like whatever, nice guy. I'm blanking on his name. I feel terrible, but there's 1,000 names in the book. And then to Lenny, who was a good mix of like, they all respected him. Some of them had played with him. They'd all seen him play. They believed in him, and he had been in the front office. So it's not like he came out of nowhere. He just took the position and they took off, and then he coached for a long time after that.
Right. So then, of course, the 90s, you had that incredible fever where they weren't just a Seattle team. They were nationwide, but Seattle loved them. Of course, Sean Kemp, Gary Payton, the glove. Was Sean Kemp's dunk that you described in that playoff, was that the best dunk you've ever seen in the game?
Yeah, I mean, he had a few that were just this sheer magnitude, the power. Him and, for me growing up, him and Kemp. I mean, him and Dominique.
Right.
They were kind of one and the same. Kemp was a little lankier and a little more powerful, and I think Dominique had maybe a little more flair. Obviously, Jordan had his own gliding thing. But you just kind of like geeked up for a Sean Kemp dunk. You kind of, even in the old Sports Center, you'd be like waiting for the lobs and waiting for the dunks. And there was something nasty, not in a mean way, but just like in an awesome, nasty, like if you could dunk like one person on your friends in a pickup game, it was probably like Kemp did in the NBA.
So of course they were great teams, and they had a couple, near misses, and people will call them chokes, whatever. But they did get to the finals. There was Detlef Schrempf, there was Derek McKee, there were some greats. But from your book, what is so interesting, what is so good, is the way that George Karl and Payton, and all of them, but the way they had their camps, and the way Gary Payton talked about how he would be at the camp. If it's a Gary Payton camp in Seattle, he's going to be there the whole time, right? And I know him and Karl didn't get along at times, but both of them were similar in that they ran great camps, and that led to the Christies, the Jason Terrys, the Isaiahs. How did you find out about those camps? Who was the first one to tell you about that?
Doug Christie, who was the kind of the oldest of the legacy guys, who was the first one to kind of, Doug Edwards made it out, but he was the first bigger name that we've heard of to come out of that area, was telling me, and I didn't really interview everybody in chronological order, but he happened to be luckily kind of one of the first guys that I interviewed. I could have talked to Doug for 5 hours. He's just a great, personable, fun guy to talk to. And he was explaining how he used to go to, all these camps, and he would see all the actual players, big downtown Freddie Brown would be at his high school or whatever. And he would see X-Man, he won a contest, and X-Man came, picked him up at his house and took him to a game. And the Sonics were a part of his growing up life. And so when he started talking to me about it, I began researching more about the camps, and it turned out that they all went to these Sonic camps. And even as you say in the forward, like early on, there was not a big feel for Seattle basketball nationwide, or even from college. UW wasn't that big of a deal. Detlef Schrempf's teams were okay, but after that, there was a huge lull between like the good kind of Sweet 16 teams under Romar. And so, as I interviewed him and George Karl and Gary Payton, you realize all these guys, when talking to Isaiah, and he clued me in a little bit, because like he's like, I went to Jamal Crawford's camp, and Jamal's like, I went to Doug Christie's camp, and they like, well, we all went to Gary Payton's camps, right? Like it came out in the recurring parts of the conversation. But like, Gary really drove it home, and of course couldn't resist digging Michael Jordan, and it was like one of my favorite.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
My favorite interviews. He was obviously awesome to talk to, but he had this great line where he's just like, yeah, Jordan, people go to a Jordan camp in Chicago for 4 days. You're there talking to a bunch of scrubs. And then, the last day he comes at lunch and shoots around with some kid and plays horse. And, he's never there. And it's like, oh, I saw Michael Jordan. Maybe he signed a bunch of balls for kids and left. You were at a Gary Payton camp. I was there for breakfast. I was there all day. I didn't leave till dinner. If you were good, I was coming to your high school games. Like, I wanted you to know I cared about you. And that's what they all said. I mean, he went to Isaiah's games. He went to Jason Terry's games. Jason Terry, helped Isaiah in high school. Jamal Crawford worked out with Doug Christie to try to get to the NBA. Like, these guys were all a tight-knit family.
Yeah. Just an incredible hoop city. It reminds me in some ways of Rafe Bartholomew's Pacific Rims. It's about basketball in the Philippines.
Okay.
How it's just everything, right? It's just everything. If a mayor wants to get in nice with the people in the city, he buys them a basketball hoop,
Yeah.
And just, you talk about, I mean, guys are back in the summer, and Jamal Crawford's an NBA player, and he's playing against some high school dudes. Like, cool, come on up, let's play. Yeah. And Payton, I mean, just such an inspiring thing. And I coached basketball for 8 years at the high school level. And to see like Coach Bethea and those guys about how they, it's one thing to talk about, we are a family.
Yeah.
But the Seattle Hoops dynasty is just awesome.
It was special. It really was. It was
special.
When you write a book, you get lucky if you like the people and it's enjoyable and interesting, and you don't know. I mean, I knew Isaiah well, and I knew a little bit of the story, but it could have been something where, I'd had a couple dealings with some of the other players over the years. I interviewed Doug Christie when he was on the Kings in 2002. Like, I don't know. He was a nice guy then. Who knows?
Sure.
But all of them were to a man so enthusiastic about their own city, the hoops there.
Yeah.
The WNBA team, playing well, the Storm winning championships and holding it down for them. And like, it's cool when it just is as a writer and as a person, as a human, it's cool to see people attach and have pride in where they live, and to be able to know that they're passing it down and doing good in their own community. It's just awesome.
Kevin Durant was only there for a year, and he had some great quotes in there just about how Seattle basketball is incredible. And you did a great job, because I'm rooting for all those players. I'm rooting for Seattle. Hopefully they get the NBA team.
Thanks. Yeah.
You know how they say that, rappers have bars. I had a bar in a freestyle competition. My line was, sipping on Chris with tea like Doug. Go baseline, I dunk on your mug. That was it.
Good. It's really good.
That's my one line of all time. That's my one line of all time. What is next for you? What are you working on?
I have a couple pitches out with my agent. I have some ideas, pitches out that I once they're out, I have no problem, talking about them and going through them all that. So I will let you know a couple of big ones. I'm doing this mini kind of series of books on, they're like kind of not really hometown heroes. I'm calling them like kind of like badass, bite-sized bios, where it's like 10,000 word biographies on. There's guys who no one's going to read 100,000 words on. My growing up with Mike Gator Greenwell, like from the Red Sox, like race car driver, alligator wrestler, like, all-star. Like, there's guys that I'm just fascinated with, that I think there's a market of, in a PDF format, really well done, 10,000 words for these local fan bases. So I have about 4 of those that I'm going to put out this year. So I always like to bounce between really big, large projects. And then for a slow grind, we have 2, I can't say which ones they are. We have 2 that we're working towards. And then obviously the Hoops Heist documentary, which is supposedly getting up and running soon too. So.
Oh, right. That'll be a great one to watch.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Well, thank you. There are great sports writers. There are great writers of sports, and there are great writers, and you fit all 3 of those categories. So
more is my heart. Thank you,
man. Really appreciate your time. I know you're a busy man. I know, I'm just so lucky that you're able to be on the podcast with me. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, man. I appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure.
Down the road.
Awesome. And great luck with your writing.
Thank you.
Take care. Thank you.